Everyone warned him to stay away from her, but one man refused to listen. Discover the untold story of Everly Blake, a homeless girl shunned by society, deemed cursed by whispers of misfortune, whose desperate plea for help sparked a transformation that defied all expectations. What did this millionaire do that changed her life forever? Stay tuned to uncover a journey of heartbreak, hidden truths, and a miracle that will leave you questioning everything. In the fading light of a bitter winter evening, the city's pulse slowed to a subdued rhythm as neon signs flickered over rain-slicked sidewalks. Amidst the bustle of commuters and the hurried footsteps of busy professionals, a small figure sat huddled on a cold concrete curb. Everly Blake, a slight girl with tangled chestnut hair and eyes too old for her age, clutched a worn blanket around her frail shoulders. The icy wind bit at her skin, yet she remained motionless, her gaze fixed on the distant glow of a high-rise. Her presence was almost ghost-like, a silent plea for warmth and compassion in a world that had long since turned its back on her. Everly had not always been alone. Once, she had known laughter and the gentle touch of a mother's hand, but life's cruel twists had left her with only fragments of memories and a relentless hunger for safety. Now, she was known by the few who crossed her path as the girl everyone said should never be saved, a child cursed by misfortune, whose very existence was shrouded in whispered warnings. Those warnings echoed in every reluctant glance from passers-by, and in every sidelong look from the shelter workers who, despite their sympathy, hesitated to offer her more than a few coins. As the cold deepened and the crowd thinned, one figure, distinct among the evening's hurried masses, paused before her. Atticus Redwood, a self-made millionaire whose success was carved out of decades of hard work and quiet resilience, had just stepped out of a sleek black car parked along the avenue. Dressed impeccably in a tailored overcoat and polished boots, he was the embodiment of modern success. Yet behind his calm, discerning eyes lay memories of hardship from a youth spent in poverty, a past that had taught him to recognize the silent cries of those forgotten by society. When Atticus's gaze met Everly's, the world around them seemed to blur. For a moment, the cacophony of city sounds, honking horns, distant chatter, the scuff of footsteps, fell away, leaving only a deep, resonant silence. There was an undeniable spark in her eyes, a mixture of despair and a fragile, unspoken hope that perhaps someone would finally notice her. Her voice, barely above a whisper, cut through the chill air, "Please, help me." The plea was simple, yet it carried the weight of years of abandonment and heartache. Atticus knelt down, lowering his imposing frame to meet hers eye to eye. His expression, usually reserved and calculated, softened into one of genuine concern as he extended a hand toward the trembling girl. "Hey there," he said quietly, his tone warm and reassuring, "you shouldn't be out here in the cold. Come with me, and let's get you some warmth." His words, unburdened by any hint of condescension, carried a promise of safety, a promise that resonated deeply within Everly's weary soul. In that charged moment, as the wind howled around them and the city lights flickered in the distance, the unlikely meeting between a hardened businessman and a forsaken child set the stage for a journey neither could have imagined. Atticus, compelled by a blend of empathy in his own painful recollections of struggle, decided that despite the dire warnings he had heard about her, he would not let Everly remain alone on the streets. In his heart, he knew that her future did not have to be defined by the darkness of her past. As he gently wrapped the blanket around her and helped her to her feet, a fragile bond began to form, a bond that would soon be tested by public scrutiny, personal demons, and the weight of old superstitions. That night, as Atticus drove away in his sleek car, leaving behind the biting cold and the indifferent crowd, the city seemed to hold its breath. The neon lights danced on wet asphalt, and every glimmer of reflected hope whispered a silent promise, that sometimes, even when everyone says no, one act of kindness can change a life forever. Atticus Redwood couldn't shake the memory of Everly's trembling eyes as he gently lifted her from the cold concrete curb. That brief moment had carved itself into his heart, a silent vow that he would not let this child be lost to the unforgiving streets. Once safely inside his sleek car, Atticus wrapped her in a worn, yet comforting, cashmere scarf, murmuring reassurances as he drove through the rain-soaked city. The soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic patter of rain against the windows provided an unexpected lullaby, a gentle contrast to the harshness of her previous life. During the drive, Atticus's thoughts swirled with memories of his own humble beginnings. He recalled nights spent shivering in cramped apartments and the aching void left by a society that often looked past those who needed help the most. The parallel between his past and Everly's present was impossible to ignore, and with each passing mile, his resolve grew stronger. He silently promised himself that he would create a safe space for her, a place where she could begin to heal the wounds inflicted by neglect and abandonment. Upon arriving at a modest but well-kept youth shelter, a temporary haven for children in distress, Atticus carefully introduced Everly to the facility's quiet routine. The shelter was a far cry from the opulent world he inhabited, yet it had a warmth that could rival even the most luxurious home. Over cups of hot cocoa and gentle conversation with the shelter's compassionate staff, Everly's initial fear slowly gave way to cautious curiosity. She clutched her thin blanket as she listened to stories of hope and recovery from other children who had once felt forgotten, and even a small smile, almost imperceptible, played at the corners of her mouth. For Atticus, every minute spent at the shelter was both an act of redemption and a reminder of the long road ahead. He visited daily, sometimes bringing small treats or extra blankets, always taking time to sit with Everly and listen as she struggled to find the words to express her feelings. Their conversations were slow at first, filled with hesitant questions and quiet, stuttering answers, but gradually, a gentle dialogue emerged. In the shelter's common room, where faded posters and donated toys lent a sense of temporary normalcy, Atticus would patiently ask, "What do you dream about, Everly?" and listen intently as she described a world where the sun shone without fear, and families embraced one another without judgment. Yet even as she began to open up, the world outside remained unkind. Passers-by and even some of the shelter staff whispered about the "cursed girl," words that had haunted Everly for so long. At times, the cruel echoes of those rumors made her shrink back into herself, her eyes darkening with old pain. Atticus, ever vigilant, would gently squeeze her hand or offer a reassuring smile, silently promising that here, she was cherished, and the past would not dictate her future. As days turned into weeks, Atticus found himself wrestling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he was buoyed by the small triumphs, Everly's hesitant smiles, her willingness to share a secret drawing of a sunlit house, and the soft, tentative "thank you" that she managed to whisper on particularly hard days. On the other hand, a persistent worry gnawed at him, the fear that public attention might someday shatter the fragile trust they were building. Despite this, he remained steadfast in his commitment, arranging for Everly to attend counseling sessions and supporting her enrollment in a local school where caring teachers had been specially briefed about her background. Late one rainy evening, as Atticus sat in his study reviewing notes from a therapy session, he glanced at a photo of himself as a young boy, barefoot on city streets, eyes full of longing for a family that would embrace him. That image spurred him on, reinforcing the belief that everyone, regardless of their beginnings, deserved a chance at redemption and love. With renewed determination, he drafted plans for long-term support, envisioning a future where Everly would not only be safe but would flourish, her artistic talents nurtured, her wounds slowly healing in the light of genuine care. In that pivotal moment, as the city's neon glow reflected off rain-soaked windows and the night whispered promises of a new dawn, Atticus Redwood solidified his mission. He would stand as a bulwark against a world that had so often dismissed the vulnerable. And though the journey ahead was fraught with uncertainty and the echoes of past misfortune, he knew in his heart that saving Everly was the first step toward rewriting not just her story, but his own legacy of compassion and resilience. In the days following that first, cautious meeting, Atticus Redwood made it his personal mission to bridge the chasm between Everly's isolated world and the possibility of a loving future. Every morning, as pale sunlight filtered through the high windows of the shelter's common room, Atticus would be there, quietly, respectfully, waiting for Everly to emerge from her corner with her sketchbook tucked under her arm. The shelter was a modest, bustling place filled with children whose laughter often belied the hardships they endured, yet Everly seemed always to linger in the shadows, her eyes distant and wary. Atticus never forced conversation. Instead, he began by simply sitting with her during breakfast, his presence steady and unassuming. Over bowls of oatmeal and warm milk, he would share small details about his day, a favorite song on the radio, a memory from his own childhood, inviting her into a dialogue without demanding too much. At first, Everly's responses were clipped, her words few, as though she were testing whether it was safe to trust him. Slowly, however, the ice around her guarded heart began to crack. One rainy afternoon, as the shelter's common room filled with the soft murmur of conversation and the pitter-patter of raindrops against the windows, Atticus found Everly alone at a table, her eyes fixed on a blank sheet of paper. He sat across from her, careful not to intrude, and began to sketch a simple picture, a sun peeking over a horizon, rays spreading out to touch a field of wildflowers. The gesture was quiet, a silent invitation. After a long moment, Everly's gaze lifted from her blank paper, curiosity mingling with hesitation. "Can I try?" she asked, her voice soft and tentative. Atticus nodded encouragingly, sliding his sketchbook over to her. "Only if you want to," he said. "There's no right or wrong way to draw what you feel." For a long while, the two sat in companionable silence. Gradually, Everly began to draw. Her hand trembled slightly at first, but soon the lines became more deliberate, a small house with a sun shining overhead, a family holding hands beneath a bright sky. As she worked, Atticus gently inquired, "What do you like about this place?" referring not to the shelter, but to the world she was beginning to envision on the paper. Everly's eyes, still guarded, flickered with a trace of longing. "I used to dream of a home," she murmured, "where nobody ever said I was unlucky or cursed. A place where I could just be happy." The simplicity and sincerity of her words cut through the layers of pain she had accumulated over years of neglect and whispered warnings. Encouraged by her willingness to share even a little, Atticus slowly recounted snippets of his own past, stories of a childhood spent on the rough edges of the city, of nights when he had gone to bed hungry yet clung to hope. "I know what it feels like to be overlooked," he said softly, "but I also know that every day is a new chance to change our story." His words resonated with her, and for the first time, Everly's expression softened from one of perpetual suspicion to something resembling cautious trust. That evening, as the shelter's corridors dimmed into a gentle twilight, Atticus and Everly walked side by side along a quiet hallway. The soft glow of exit signs and the distant hum of voices provided a calm backdrop to their conversation. Everly hesitated at first, then spoke in a low, tentative voice about the nightmares that haunted her sleep, visions of shattered glass and voices that had once told her she was the source of all misfortune. Atticus listened intently, each word etching itself into his heart. "You're not to blame," he reassured her, his voice firm yet compassionate. "Those were not your mistakes, they were the echoes of a painful past that you deserve to leave behind." Over the next few weeks, their bond deepened. Atticus visited the shelter regularly, sometimes staying for hours, sometimes coming in just to exchange a few quiet words or to share a meal. He brought small gifts, a new set of colored pencils, a sketchbook with crisp pages, even a worn-out paperback of uplifting stories. Each gesture was carefully chosen to spark a little light in her dark world. In return, Everly began to open up about her dreams, her fears, and the memories she had long buried beneath the weight of isolation. She talked about the fleeting moments of joy she had experienced in her few, transient foster homes, and how those memories were quickly overshadowed by the cruelty of a world that refused to understand her. Their conversations were sometimes punctuated by long silences, during which the only sound was the quiet rustle of paper or the soft hum of a distant air conditioner. In these moments, Atticus would simply sit with her, his presence a steady reminder that she was no longer alone. Gradually, Everly's laughter began to emerge, small, tentative bursts that filled the space with unexpected warmth. The transformation was subtle yet profound, every shared story, every silent moment of understanding, chipped away at the walls that had been built around her heart. As autumn turned to winter, the chilling cold outside made the shelter's warm interior all the more precious. One crisp evening, while they sat in a corner of the common room, Atticus asked softly, "Everly, what do you want your future to look like?" For a long moment, she stared at the floor, gathering the courage to speak. "I want to feel safe," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "I want a home where I'm not afraid, where I can be loved for who I am." Those words, so simple yet laden with deep-seated longing, echoed in the quiet space between them. Atticus squeezed her hand gently and promised, "I'm going to do everything I can to give you that home, Everly. You deserve nothing less." In that instant, a fragile bridge of trust spanned the gap between their two worlds, a bridge built not of grand gestures, but of consistent care and shared vulnerability. By the time the evening drew to a close, the once cold and distant girl had begun to let down her guard, if only just enough for a glimmer of hope to shine through. Atticus's compassion had not erased the pain of her past, but it had lit a path forward, a path where every small step brought her closer to the promise of a loving, secure future. And as they parted ways that night, each returning to their respective corners of the shelter, there was an unspoken understanding that something beautiful was beginning to take root, a transformation that would change both their lives forever. Atticus Redwood's next step was to navigate the labyrinthine process of adoption, a journey as filled with bureaucracy as it was with emotion. One chilly afternoon, he arrived at Brightwood Haven once again, his resolve hardened by the promise he had made to Everly. The building, with its faded brick facade and worn wooden steps, seemed to hold memories of sorrow and hope in equal measure. Atticus was greeted by Maribel Hayworth, the orphanage director, whose tired eyes betrayed both her empathy for the children and the burden of the dark rumors that had long shadowed Everly's file. They sat in a cramped office adorned with faded photographs of smiling children and inspirational quotes that had lost some of their luster with time. The air carried a hint of stale coffee and old paper, a reminder of countless meetings with prospective adoptive parents who had come and gone, leaving behind only sighs of regret. Maribel's voice was soft yet measured as she began, "Mr. Redwood, you understand that Everly's history is complicated. Many have tried and ultimately chosen not to adopt her because of the warnings we all share. They say her presence brings misfortune." Atticus listened intently, his expression calm yet resolute. "I understand your concerns," he replied, his tone even and sincere. "But I see a child who has been deeply hurt by a life of neglect and misunderstanding. I don't believe in curses. I believe in healing. I want to give Everly a home where she is safe and loved, where her past is acknowledged but does not dictate her future." Maribel regarded him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if weighing his intentions. She shuffled through a stack of documents on her desk, finally retrieving a worn manila folder bearing the title, "Everly Blake, Case File." "This file," she said softly, "contains years of notes, incidents, and failed placements. I won't pretend it's a pleasant read. There are many accounts of unexplained mishaps and unfortunate events that followed her. Our staff has long believed that she carries with her an aura of despair, a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy born out of trauma." Atticus opened the folder slowly, his fingers brushing over handwritten notes and faded photographs of a small girl with somber eyes. Each page told a story of abandonment, of a series of foster homes that never provided the stability she so desperately needed. "I see a resilient soul," he murmured, more to himself than to Maribel. "Every one of these entries is a scar, a reminder of what she has survived. I'm here to help heal those scars, not to amplify them." Maribel leaned back in her creaky chair, the weight of years evident in the lines on her face. "You're the first person in a long time who's asked me such questions," she said, her voice a mixture of hope and resignation. "I've seen parents pass by, deterred by the superstitions and the rumors. But you have a look in your eyes that tells me you're not afraid. You're willing to look past what everyone else sees and understand the truth of her pain." The conversation stretched for hours, delving into every detail of Everly's past, her nights spent alone in cold rooms, the silent tears that had etched lines on her small face, and the whispered voices of those who had doubted her worth. Atticus spoke candidly about his own struggles growing up in a rundown neighborhood, the long nights when hope was scarce, and how those experiences had shaped him into a man who knew that every child deserved a chance at a better life. His words resonated with Maribel, who, despite her hardened exterior from years of disappointment, felt a stirring of belief that maybe, just maybe, things could change for Everly. By the end of the meeting, Maribel's guarded skepticism had softened into tentative optimism. "I will arrange for you to meet with the adoption board," she promised. "But know that this is only the beginning. The process is rigorous, and there will be many questions about how you plan to provide stability and care for a child who has been, for so long, defined by hardship and rumors." Atticus nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I'm prepared to answer every question and to prove that my home is a place where Everly can thrive. I'm not here to erase her past, but to build a future that is brighter than any darkness that has come before." As he left Brightwood Haven that day, clutching a copy of Everly's file and the promise of further interviews, the city's fading light seemed to whisper of new beginnings. Every step he took echoed his determination to defy the warnings that had once condemned this fragile girl to a life of misery. For Atticus Redwood, this was more than an adoption, it was a mission of redemption, a chance to transform whispered curses into a legacy of hope, one heart at a time. Atticus Redwood's heart pounded as he stepped out of the county office with a stack of finalized documents in his hands. Today was the day that would officially change the course of both his and Everly Blake's lives. The adoption had been approved after long, arduous hearings and countless interviews, and now the weight of responsibility, and hope, weighed on him as he drove to pick her up from Brightwood Haven. The city around him was cloaked in the soft gray light of early winter, and the streets, slick with recent rain, shimmered with the promise of a new beginning. When Atticus arrived at the orphanage, he found a subdued atmosphere in the building. The staff, who had long harbored whispered doubts about Everly's future, now regarded him with a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. Maribel Hayworth, the director, greeted him in the foyer with gentle eyes that spoke of both sorrow and tentative hope. "She's ready," she said in a quiet voice, handing him a small envelope containing Everly's personal belongings, a worn doll, a faded scarf, and a few crumpled drawings that had been her solace during lonely nights. In the common room, Everly was waiting. Her posture was reserved, her eyes a guarded mix of sadness and curiosity. The moment she saw Atticus, she hesitated, as if unsure whether to approach this man who had once been a stranger. But when he knelt down and extended a hand with a warm, steady smile, something shifted in her expression. With trembling steps, she walked over, clutching her doll as if it were a shield. Atticus's eyes met hers with a promise of safety and care, a silent vow that she was no longer alone. The drive home was quiet but significant. In the spacious, yet modest, interior of Atticus's car, the city lights blurred past as a steady drizzle fell. Atticus glanced at Everly frequently, her small fingers gripped the edge of the seat, and her eyes darted between the darkened streets and the reassuring lines of his face. Every so often, she would let out a soft sigh, as though the road ahead was both daunting and full of possibility. Atticus spoke gently about the future, a home filled with warmth, laughter, and the promise of stability, while he drove, letting the cadence of his voice serve as a lullaby to her anxious mind. Arriving at his house, a welcoming, well-kept home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, Atticus was met by curious glances from neighbors. The house, freshly painted in soft hues of cream and blue, exuded a sense of peace. Inside, every detail had been carefully arranged to create a nurturing environment for a child in need, a small bedroom with pastel walls, a handmade quilt draped over the bed, and a desk by a window that offered a view of a tidy garden. For the first few days, Everly's adjustment was fragile and filled with small challenges. She wandered through the rooms with hesitant steps, pausing to touch family photographs and admire the simple trinkets that decorated the shelves. At times, her eyes filled with tears as the unfamiliar comfort of her new surroundings collided with the memories of a harsh past. Atticus, ever patient, sat with her in these moments, gently reassuring her that the pains of yesterday would not define the promise of tomorrow. He introduced her to a few neighbors, and despite the lingering superstitions whispered in hushed tones about the cursed girl, he defended her fiercely, insisting that her past was not a burden but a testimony to her strength. During one quiet afternoon, as soft sunlight spilled through the living room windows and cast delicate patterns on the hardwood floor, Atticus sat with Everly on the back porch. They tended a small garden together, a simple patch of earth where Atticus had planted bright marigolds and lavender, chosen to dispel the chill of winter and herald the arrival of spring. Everly, once timid and withdrawn, began to show small signs of blossoming. She asked questions about the flowers and listened intently as Atticus explained how each plant needed care and time to grow. It was in these subtle, everyday moments that the promise of healing took root. Yet, not all days were filled with gentle progress. Occasionally, the ghosts of her past would resurface in the form of vivid nightmares. On nights when thunder rumbled in the distance and shadows danced along the walls, Everly would wake in a cold sweat, tears streaming down her face as she mumbled desperate pleas for a mother she believed she had lost forever. In those moments, Atticus would rush to her side, cradling her trembling form and whispering reassurances until the terror subsided. "You're safe here," he would say, his voice a steady beacon in the darkness. "I'm here, and I will never let you go." Each of these quiet, heartfelt interludes reaffirmed their bond and underscored the transformative power of unwavering love. As days turned to weeks, the transformation was gradual but undeniable. Everly's once muted drawings, filled with somber images of solitary figures and dark skies, began to evolve. New sketches emerged, homes bathed in sunlight, families united under a bright, expansive sky, and abstract bursts of color that spoke of hope and renewal. Atticus proudly displayed these artworks on a corkboard in her room, a visible reminder of her journey from despair toward a more hopeful future. Still, the world outside remained a constant challenge. Gossip persisted among some neighbors, and the tainted reputation that had followed Everly into the shelter occasionally cast a shadow over her progress. Atticus met these challenges head-on, using his influence and kind determination to advocate for her, both in quiet conversations with skeptical neighbors and in broader community forums that sought to change the narrative around children like her. His gentle persistence slowly transformed doubt into a cautious acceptance, and even the most bitter skeptics began to see Everly not as a bearer of ill fortune, but as a resilient child with the power to overcome her past. By the time one rainy evening arrived and the steady hum of conversation gave way to quiet reflection, Atticus and Everly sat together on the back porch once more. The drizzle had softened the edges of the day, and the garden, now vibrant with the first blooms of early spring, stood as a testament to their shared journey. In a soft, heartfelt moment, Everly looked up at him and asked, "Will I ever stop being afraid?" Her voice was small, laden with the weight of years spent in fear, yet tinged with a hope that she was finally ready to trust. Atticus's response was measured and sincere. "It might take time, darling," he said gently, "but every day, every moment we share, will build a future where fear has no place. You are not alone, I'm here, and together, we'll make sure you have a home filled with love and safety." In that quiet moment, under the soft glow of a rain-washed sky, the promise of a new beginning shone brightly. Every hardship, every tear that had marked their journey, was slowly transforming into a foundation for hope, a foundation upon which they would build a future free from the chains of the past. Atticus Redwood's steadfast love and Everly Blake's resilient spirit converged to create something extraordinary, the promise that, even in a world that had once dismissed her as cursed, she could find a home where she was truly cherished. The following days in the new home were a mix of tentative adjustments and small, heartfelt victories. Atticus Redwood devoted himself entirely to creating a safe, nurturing environment for Everly Blake, whose past had been marred by loneliness, abandonment, and the weight of whispered curses. Every morning, as pale sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains of the guest room he had prepared for her, Everly would wake slowly from fitful sleep. Her first moments were often spent in silence, eyes unfocused as if she were still caught between two worlds, the one of bitter memories and the promise of a better future. Atticus would always be there at her bedside, offering a warm smile and gentle words that, although soft, carried the firm assurance of unwavering care. Their daily routine gradually took shape like a delicate dance. Mornings began with quiet breakfasts at a small wooden table in the kitchen, where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of warm toast. Atticus, who had learned to set aside the trappings of his busy corporate life during these moments, would ask Everly about her dreams and the simple things that made her smile, a favorite song, the color of a flower, a cherished memory from a past foster home. In response, Everly's words were initially sparse, often just a hesitant nod or a soft murmur, but as days turned into weeks, she began to share small snippets of her inner world. She talked about drawing pictures of houses with bright, welcoming windows, of the comforting lullabies her mother used to sing, and of the silent wish that one day, she wouldn't feel so invisible. Afternoons were reserved for exploration and healing. Atticus arranged for Everly to attend counseling sessions with Dr. Savita Rao, a compassionate therapist whose office was adorned with pastel artwork and soft instrumental music that seemed to ease the heaviness in the air. In these sessions, Everly's initial reluctance slowly gave way to cautious openness. With Dr. Rowe's gentle guidance, she began to confront the shadows of her past, the stark images of lonely nights, the echo of harsh voices that had told her she was cursed, and the deep-seated fear of being abandoned again. Over time, through drawing, guided meditation, and even playful role-playing games, Everly started to see that the misfortunes of her past were not a curse to be borne forever but scars that could slowly heal with understanding and love. Atticus, ever vigilant, attended some of these sessions as a quiet observer, learning the language of healing that would help him support her through the darker moments. He took careful notes and later read books on trauma recovery and child psychology, determined to leave no stone unturned in his quest to restore Everly's sense of security. In the evenings, as the world outside quieted and the soft glow of lamplight filled the home, they would often sit together in the living room. Atticus would share stories from his own youth, tales of hardship, resilience, and ultimately, hope, that resonated deeply with Everly. Slowly, these shared narratives built a bridge between their two pasts, showing her that pain, while real, could be transformed into strength. Yet, not every day was smooth. There were nights when Everly's nightmares returned with a vengeance, when shadows in the corners of her new room seemed to whisper the old curses, and she would wake up crying, her small body trembling uncontrollably. On those nights, Atticus would stay up with her, cradling her in a warm embrace until the terror subsided. He learned to read the language of her silent cries, the way her eyes would fill with tears just before a nightmare took hold, and responded with soft words of reassurance, promising that he would always be there to protect her, no matter how dark the night. These long nights, filled with whispered promises and gentle rocking in the quiet of the early hours, slowly eroded the power of the old voices that once haunted her dreams. As the seasons shifted from the chill of winter to the promise of spring, the transformation in their home became evident not only in the gradual bloom of the garden outside but in the change in Everly herself. Her once muted drawings, which depicted forlorn figures and stormy skies, began to fill with vibrant images, a bright sun, a happy family, and a home that radiated warmth and security. In school, her teachers noticed a newfound confidence. The girl who once sat alone in the corner was now engaging more, timidly but steadily, with classmates who had come to admire her quiet strength. Even the skeptical whispers among the neighbors started to fade, replaced by murmurs of surprise and cautious approval as they saw Everly's progress. During one particularly radiant afternoon, while the backyard was awash with the fresh colors of spring, Everly and Atticus tended the small garden they had planted together. The garden, a patchwork of marigolds, daisies, and lavender, symbolized the slow but sure renewal of life that had taken root in their home. As Everly knelt by a row of budding flowers, she looked up at Atticus with eyes that had begun to shine with a tentative optimism. "I'm not scared anymore," she whispered, her voice steadier than before. I think I'm starting to believe that I can be happy." Atticus's heart swelled with quiet joy as he knelt beside her and said, "You are brave, Everly. Every day, you prove that love can heal even the deepest wounds." In that moment, as the gentle breeze carried the scent of blossoms and hope, Atticus knew that their journey, though far from over, had taken a decisive turn toward healing. The once dark shadows of her past were slowly being replaced by the bright promise of a future built on trust, resilience, and unwavering love. Every tear shed in the solitude of the night, every whispered fear, was gradually transforming into the foundation of a new beginning, a testament to the power of compassion to rewrite even the most painful stories. By the time the day ended, and the soft light of dusk gave way to the peaceful embrace of night, their home was filled with a sense of renewal. Atticus and Everly sat together on the back porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear sky, and in that quiet, shared silence, the promise of tomorrow glowed brightly. Each day brought its own challenges, but also the hope that, together, they could overcome anything. The healing had only just begun, yet every small step they took was a victory against the despair that had once defined Everly's life, a victory built on the simple, transformative power of unconditional love. Everly's world, which had begun to glimmer with fragile hope, was suddenly thrown into turmoil when an unexpected figure emerged from the shadows of her past. One chilly morning, as the early light filtered through the thin curtains of Atticus Redwood's modest home, a sharp knock on the door shattered the calm routine they had slowly built together. Atticus opened the door to find a stern-faced man in a worn leather jacket, his eyes cold and calculating. It was Vaughn Harcourt, a distant uncle whom Everly had only heard about in hushed, half-forgotten stories at the shelter, a man with a reputation for ruthlessness and opportunism. Vaughn's sudden appearance sent a jolt through the room. He claimed that, as a blood relative and legal heir, he had the right to take Everly away from Atticus. With an accusatory tone, he insisted that Atticus's sudden interest in the girl was nothing more than a publicity stunt, a way to profit from her tragic past. His words were sharp and venomous, and for a moment, the fragile peace that had begun to blossom in their home trembled on the brink of collapse. In the ensuing days, tensions escalated. Vaughn began circulating legal documents and making frantic phone calls to a lawyer he had long trusted, insisting on a custody hearing to challenge the adoption. Atticus, taken aback by the betrayal from a family member he had never sought out, resolved to protect Everly at all costs. He reassured her in gentle, determined tones that she was safe with him, even as her eyes filled with tears of confusion and fear at the thought of being torn away again. The legal showdown was set in motion, and soon, the local courthouse became a battleground of conflicting narratives. In a somber, crowded hearing room, Judge Rowena Fitzpatrick presided over the case. Atticus sat calmly at one table, his demeanor composed yet laced with underlying determination, while Vaughn glared from the opposing side, his tone aggressive as he detailed a litany of claims about Everly's background. The atmosphere was thick with tension as both sides presented their arguments. Everly, still only a teenager but with a wisdom far beyond her years, was called to testify. Standing before the stern faces in the courtroom, she recounted her own memories in a voice that trembled at first but grew stronger with every word. She spoke of the long, lonely nights in the shelter, the whispered warnings that labeled her as cursed, and the overwhelming pain of being abandoned. But then, with a clarity that silenced even the harshest critics, she described the love and care that Atticus had shown her, how he listened to her dreams, how he stayed up with her through nightmares, how his steadfast presence had slowly helped her believe that she deserved a chance to be happy. Her testimony, raw and unfiltered, struck a chord with everyone present. The judge listened intently as Everly's voice, though soft, carried the weight of her past and the promise of a hopeful future. When Vaughn attempted to paint her as a manipulative or unstable child, Everly's honest recollection of her own pain and her newfound strength cut through his accusations like a beacon of truth. Atticus took the stand next, recounting his own experiences, his difficult upbringing, the struggles he had faced, and the unwavering belief that no child should be defined by a series of misfortunes. He explained how he had seen beyond the rumors and had recognized in Everly not a cursed soul, but a resilient spirit in desperate need of stability and unconditional love. Every word was delivered with the quiet authority of a man who had built his success on compassion and perseverance, and his testimony slowly turned the tide in the courtroom. Throughout the hearing, the air was electric with emotion. Supportive murmurs came from the gallery as even skeptical observers began to see the deep bond that had formed between Atticus and Everly, a bond forged not in the absence of hardship, but in the courageous confrontation of it. When the judge finally called for a recess, the tension was palpable. Atticus and Everly exchanged a look, a silent promise that, no matter what the outcome, they would face the future together. After hours of deliberation, Judge Fitzpatrick returned to deliver her ruling. In a measured yet resolute tone, she declared that the best interests of Everly were clearly served by remaining with Atticus Redwood, whose home and heart offered the stability and care that she desperately needed. Vaughan Harcourt's claims were dismissed as opportunistic, his actions deemed a betrayal of family trust rather than a genuine concern for Everly's welfare. In that moment, as the gavel fell and the courtroom erupted in a cautious murmur of relief, Everly's eyes welled up with tears, but these were tears of release, of a burden finally lifted. Atticus's steady presence by her side spoke louder than words, a promise that her future would no longer be dictated by the cruelty of her past. Outside the courthouse, as winter's chill began to give way to a tentative spring, Atticus and Everly emerged together, hand in hand, into a world that now seemed filled with possibilities. The legal battle, though emotionally draining and fraught with unexpected challenges, had affirmed what they both knew deep in their hearts, that love, steadfast and compassionate, could overcome even the darkest of legacies. The encounter with Vaughan Harcourt had been the ultimate test, a trial by fire that had threatened to shatter the fragile sanctuary they were building. But it also became a turning point that galvanized their resolve. In the face of opportunism and bitter family rivalries, Atticus's unwavering belief in Everly had triumphed, paving the way for a future where her scars would serve not as a curse, but as the foundation for her extraordinary strength. On a crisp spring morning, when the chill of winter had finally given way to gentle warmth and the first blooms of the season began to push through the thawing earth, a new chapter unfolded in Everly Blake's life. The memory of courtrooms and bitter legal battles, of whispered accusations and heart-wrenching nights, had slowly receded into the background, replaced by the soft promise of a fresh start. Atticus Redwood's home now stood as a beacon of hope amidst the quiet suburbia, a place where every room had been carefully prepared to nurture a young heart once burdened by neglect and despair. The walls, painted in soothing tones of cream and sky blue, were adorned with hand-drawn pictures and photographs capturing moments of tentative joy, a mural in the hallway depicting a sun rising over a field of wildflowers, and a collection of snapshots showing Everly slowly beginning to smile. In every corner of the house, there was an air of renewal, as if the very walls were determined to help mend the past. The transformation in Everly was most visible in the small garden that Atticus and she had planted together. In the backyard, rows of marigolds, daisies, and lavender swayed gently in the soft breeze, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the dark days that had once defined her existence. Each plant had been chosen with care, symbolizing the growth and resilience that had taken root in her heart. On that particular morning, as Atticus and Everly knelt together in the garden, the delicate scent of blooming flowers mingled with the chirps of early birds. Everly's hands, once trembling with fear, now moved with purpose as she carefully tended to the tender sprouts. "I'm not scared anymore," she whispered, almost in disbelief at the calm certainty in her voice. Atticus's warm smile and steady presence affirmed her words, silently promising that together they would face whatever challenges came next. The community, once divided by gossip and old superstitions, had also begun to change. Neighbors who had once muttered about a cursed child now looked on with quiet admiration as Everly made small strides toward normalcy. At school, teachers praised her growing confidence, and classmates who had once shunned her now invited her into group projects and lunchtime conversations. Everly's artwork, once filled with bleak images of isolation and despair, had transformed into colorful expressions of hope, a bright house with a welcoming porch, a family gathered under a clear blue sky, and abstract patterns that evoked dreams of endless possibility. Atticus, too, had found new purpose. Inspired by Everly's journey, he launched a philanthropic initiative through Redwood Investments that focused on providing stable housing and educational support for at-risk youth. He partnered with local nonprofits and community leaders to create scholarships, mentor programs, and safe spaces for children who had known only hardship. Every success story that emerged from these programs was a testament to the belief that every child deserved a second chance, an idea that had been so boldly embodied by his decision to adopt Everly. The culmination of these efforts was celebrated one bright afternoon at the newly opened Quinn Redwood Youth Center, a community space designed to offer counseling, tutoring, and creative workshops to vulnerable children. The center's grand opening was a jubilant affair, attended by families, local officials, and even those who had once doubted the possibility of transformation. Amid laughter and heartfelt speeches, Everly was invited to share her story. Standing on a small stage beneath a banner that read, "A New Beginning," she spoke with a quiet strength that belied the tumultuous journey behind her. "I used to think that I was cursed," she said, her voice steady and clear, "but now I know that my past does not define me. I am here because someone believed I deserved a chance, and I believe that every day is a chance to be better." Her words resonated deeply, eliciting applause that was both joyful and cathartic. Atticus watched from the front row, his eyes glistening with pride and relief. In that moment, the hardships of the past, every tear, every whispered warning, were transformed into a legacy of hope, resilience, and love. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and the center's lights dimmed to a gentle glow, Atticus and Everly stood together on the front steps. The cool breeze carried the faint melody of a distant song, and above, the sky was painted with the soft hues of twilight, a symbolic farewell to the darkness that had once threatened to engulf them. Everly turned to him, her expression reflective yet hopeful, and said, "Thank you for believing in me." Atticus wrapped an arm around her shoulder and replied, "Thank you for letting me in." In that simple exchange, a world of pain and promise converged, sealing a pact between them that no force could ever break. Together, they stepped into the night, leaving behind the echoes of sorrow for a future bright with possibility, a future where every ending heralded a new beginning, and every heart, no matter how scarred, had the power to heal. The ending of this story resonates deeply with me because it transforms what seemed like an insurmountable curse into a powerful testament to resilience and hope. It's not a neat, fairy tale conclusion but rather an authentic portrayal of the long, arduous journey from despair to healing. The reunion and the community's support, culminating in the unveiling of a youth center and the heartfelt testimony of a once-forgotten girl, remind us that even the darkest past can be rewritten. What truly moves me is how both Everly and Atticus overcome the weight of societal superstition and personal loss, finding strength in their bond. Their story challenges us to rethink what we consider as curses. Sometimes, they are simply scars from which the human spirit can grow, ultimately proving that love and determination can create a future filled with promise and transformation.